Well, hello everyone. It has been several weeks since the last video, an important video today. So, why were medieval armies so small? And this question is interlaced with other questions. Why were some people from the desert suddenly able to take over such a vast area in the Dark Ages? What happened in the Dark Ages? Why was there a lack of learning in the Dark Ages? Why was there a lack of history written in the Dark Ages? Why did the Normans have to suddenly build castles in England when they took over England? Weren't there any castles there? The history sort of seems to suggest that time starts again. We emerge from the Stone Age and castles start to be built as if the Romans were never there. All these questions have one answer. They all relate to one theme. Why did Justinian, emperor of the East Roman Empire, suddenly decide that he was going to reconquer the West Roman Empire? What's going on with that? And how was he so successful? How did he do it? And we're going to explain why. Because one author, Procopius, who was the court historian in the time of Justinian, basically said that Emperor Justinian killed 1 trillion people. 1 trillion people died during the reign of Justinian. And his explanation was that Justinian must be a demon. There's no other explanation. They didn't know what a comet was. They may have known what a volcano was. Something happened in the Dark Ages which wiped out most of the population. Not just some of the population, but most of the population. And this is why armies went from, tens of thousands to under 10,000 in the Middle Ages. There can be no other explanation. And here's an article actually from 1994, because if you look at Wikipedia now, it talks about simultaneous volcanic explosions, which did it because I guess a comet's too far-fetched. But here's something from 1994. Comet may have caused catastrophe on Earth. Collision of celestial body gaining support as likely reason behind string of disasters in the 6th century. A giant meteor or comet fragment, the size of some of those which last week collided with Jupiter, this must be, Shoemaker Levy 9, right? May have played a key role in determining human history according to new evidence. Scientific explanations. Investigations suggest that a collision between Earth and a celestial body may have been partially responsible for the final demise of classical civilization and the onset of the Dark Ages. Climate data and historical references point to there having been some sort of major world catastrophe around 435 AD, which had the effect of massively polluting the atmosphere and causing a nuclear winter. Incredible. A cosmic collision, a comet or meteor 2/3 of a mile in diameter. An analysis of tree ring data. Sudden slow growth in tree ring, which lasted for 15 years. Now, comets are erupting today, and the dust doesn't last 15 years. I'll tell you how it lasts a few days. That's it. That's all it lasts. It doesn't last for 15 years. This is incredible. This is unbelievable. Mark Bailey, yes, he did write about this. Also, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett may have been the first to suggest this. I'm not sure about that. Bailey may have used some of their information. I'm not quite sure who originated the idea. We're going to look at their sources as well in the Chronicles. Just amazing. Crops failed in Italy, Mesopotamia, China, the British Isles, elsewhere, and terrible famines, plague, and war broke out, causing long-term economic and urban decline. The cosmic eruption is probably the front runner because a large volcanic eruption would normally leave an acid signature detectable in ice cores obtained from deep in the Greenland ice cap. These cores, up to 2 miles long, have enabled volcanologists to plot. Why did it do that? To plot volcanic history of the last 9,000 years. However, no trace of any eruption for the mid-530s has been found. The volcanic option is the least likely explanation, said Dr. Klaus Hammer, an ice core expert at Copenhagen University. So there you go. And we can go on and on and on. And so a massive celestial mass, 10 miles a second, hitting Earth. And it actually says this in one of the British Chronicles that it was a fire from heaven. Okay? It actually says this. It doesn't say anywhere that it was a volcano. Constantinople's population shrank from 500,000 to 25,000. Boom. Suddenly we have a reason why the Arabs could take over. Suddenly we have a reason why the Byzantine Empire collapsed. Because they didn't have enough men, they didn't have enough money to build an army to face them. You see? Before they easily faced the Sassanids, later they were weak against the Sassanids. The Sassanids threw up army after army. The Byzantines only had one army under Heraclius. But because he learned all the ancient military skills, he made that army last and last and last and outlasted the Sassanids. Amazing. I urge you to look up the history of Heraclius. Just amazing. But anyway, it goes on. And this is the explanation. So why were medieval armies so small? The tactics of medieval warfare often relied on smaller, more mobile units of soldiers such as knights and cavalry, rather than large formations of infantry like those who do. Oh, yes, of course. This made it easier for medieval armies to operate with smaller. Oh, yes, of course. Oh, but then there's another explanation. A professional army like that of the Roman Empire could campaign over multiple seasons and could rely on an efficient military bureaucracy to back it up. Moreover, a medieval ruler had to consider that his men were also meant to be growing their crops. They were not professional soldiers, but seasonal levies. That's not true. So in the Middle Ages, there were specific fighting men. You worked, you fought, you prayed. That's how it works. So that's not true. And that's not true because it's not showing the population decline. The population decline of Rome between ancient times of maybe 25 million to the Dark Ages of 50,000, Charlemagne's time. You see? Tiny populations. Tiny. Why? And here we go. Now the comet theory has declined, and now they're talking about volcanic eruptions. In 2018, medieval scholar Michael McCormick nominated 536 as the worst year to be alive because of the extreme weather events caused by the volcanic eruption earlier in the year, causing average temperatures in Europe and China to decline, and resulting in crop failures and famine for well over a year. Well, we've seen it could have been 15 years. It went on and on and on. It's just unbelievable. The worst time in history. And there's Emperor Justinian, what he looked like. I really love this. This is basically when the Venetians sacked Venice in the Fourth Crusade. When they sacked Constantinople, they took this back, and this is thought to be from a statue of Justinian. They've planted it on top of their basilica, and it's called the Carmanola. So that's Justinian gazing towards Constantinople. And here we have a paper, the Justinian Plague, an inconsequential pandemic. One key account of the Justinian pandemic asserts that the initial occurrence killed 99.9% of the population. And it makes sense. If there's a volcanic winter, people can't get vitamin D, more people die of the plague. While another influential, and this was, the source is Michael the Syrian, okay, from the 1100s. That's not a contemporary source, so that might wash with ecological history of mankind paper. It wouldn't work in a history paper. You want something contemporary. While another influential late antique author claims that Emperor Justinian, whom the author claims was an evil demon, killed 1 trillion people during his reign in various disasters. All right. So that person is not real. This was on the plane, right? That man is not real. He's not real. How Justinian, this is Procopius, how Justinian, he was the court historian, but he wrote this in secret, possibly to have some leverage just in case Procopius was deposed. He wanted to show the successor. Oh, I was actually against him all along. That Justinian was not a man but a demon, as I have said, in human form, one might prove by considering the enormity of the evils he brought upon mankind. For the monstrousness of his actions is the power of a fiend is manifest. Certainly an accurate reckoning of all those who he destroyed would be impossible, I think, for anyone but God to make. Sooner could one number, I fancy, the sand in the sea than the men this emperor murdered. Examining the countries that he made desolate of inhabitants, I would say he slew 1 trillion people. And in Greek, he actually says a myriad of myriads, 10,000 times 10,000 times 10,000. For Libya, vast as it is, he's so devastated, you'd have to walk a long way to find a single man. And he would be remarkable, yet 80,000 Vandals capable of bearing arms had dwelt here. And as for their wives and children and servants, who could guess their number? Where did they go? What happened? It's a mystery. It's amazing. And he blames Justinian for all this because people didn't know that comets actually existed. They didn't know what had happened. They had no clue about it. Italy was desolated of men, even worse than Libya was. And he's not even talking about other countries. It's incredible. And he basically says Justinian is a demon who is not real, and this is proven by the fact that he is a shapeshifter. He says Justinian is actually a shapeshifter, and people saw him sort of changing and shimmering, and he wasn't a real person. And this is proven by the fact that he hardly ever ate, and he never slept. He just slept for 1 hour, and he spent the whole night, Procopius says, he spent the whole night walking around in circles and plotting how to best destroy the Roman Empire and kill everyone. I mean, that's how bad this situation was, that this is actually what Procopius may have believed. I mean, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable. How could any man this is also Procopius, fully describe Justinian's character? He had all these vices and other even greater ones in larger proportion than any man. Indeed, nature seems to have taken away all other men's vices and to have implanted them all in this man's breast. Besides all this, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on and on. He's saying Justinian is the worst person ever. And some evidence, some documentary evidence. Roman historian Procopius again. A dread portent took place. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, and seemed exceedingly like a sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. And it goes on. The sun's rays were weak, and they appeared blue in colour. The heat from the sun was feeble. The moon was empty of splendour. The seasons were all jumbled together, prolonged frost and unseasonable drought. The sky is blended with alien elements, just like cloudy weather, except prolonged. It stretched like a hide across the sky and prevented the true colours of the sun and moon being seen, along with the sun's warmth. It goes on and on. This goes on and on. Yes, he says Justinian is a demon. He's not human. He's not real. Now we have, from Gildas, a fascinating and really interesting article. And Baron Blackett and Alan Wilson spoke about this in their books, their controversial books. Basically, as soon as Vortigern invited the Saxons in, why did he invite the Saxons in? He thought he could control them, but then he couldn't. Why not? And then they came in massive numbers and they overtook and overthrew the Britons. Why was this? We don't know. And they reckon it's because England was very highly populated, but then a comet hit and wiped it out. And here we have a Dark Ages explanation of this. For the fire of vengeance, justly kindled by former crimes, spread from sea to sea, fed by the hands of our foes in the east, and did not cease until, destroying the neighbourhood towns and lands, it reached the other side of the island. It dipped its red and savage tongue in the Western Ocean. So they saw it was a fragment of comets, and it sank down over the Western Ocean. In these assaults, therefore, not unlike those of the Assyrian upon Judea, was fulfilled in our case what the prophet describes in words of lamentation. They have burned with fire the sanctuary and have polluted on earth the tabernacle of thy name. And again, O God, the Gentiles have come into thine inheritance, the holy temple they have defiled. And so the columns were levied with the ground by the frequent strokes of the battering ram. So these are the booms of the impacts. All the husbandmen routed together with their bishops, priests, and people, whilst the sword gleamed and the flames crackled around them on every side. So he might be describing a comet. Lamentable to behold, in the midst of the streets lay the tops of lofty towers, tumbled to the ground, stones of high walls, holy altars. Is he making this up? Fragments of human bodies covered with livid clots of coagulated blood, so that could be the plague of Justinian, looking as though they had been squeezed together in a press. Well, that could be humans crushed by a cataclysm, and with no chance of being buried, save in the ruins of the houses or in the ravening bellies of wild beasts and birds. With reverence be it spoken to their blessed souls, if indeed there were many found who were carried at that time into the high heaven by the holy angels. So entirely had the vintage, once so fine, denigrated and become bitter, that in the words of the prophet there was hardly a grape or ear of corn to be seen where husbandman had turned his back. And the miserable remnant went to the mountains, being murdered in great numbers by famine and their foes hunting them down like sheep to be slaughtered. Do you see? This was a pretty bad time to be. I'm getting the impression this was not a good time to be alive. So when we build the time machine, don't go back to this time. I don't think we're going to like it. And it goes on and on and on. So basically, and later on he actually says the current generation doesn't understand how bad it really was. And again in Nennius, who was a British historian, same thing. Just after Vortigern takes control, what happens is Vortigern entered the city with his 9 sons, retired to the house where he exercised such generous hospitality, St. Germanus, etc., etc. And basically he says, and behold, early in the night, fire fell from heaven, burned the city together with those who were with the tyrant, that's Vortigern, that none escaped, and the citadel has never been rebuilt, even to this day. And then and that's how the Anglo-Saxons were able to take over. So, do you see, it's all starting to make sense. These lands were empty, so the Arabs actually could take over. These lands had been emptied. Byzantium, the population collapsed to 25,000. They didn't have the men to stop them. This explains why they only raised one army. The army lost. They couldn't build a new one. Terrible things had occurred, but it happened somewhere in Western Europe. So here, it was a little bit better. It was famine as well, but more people survived whatever had happened. Now, isn't that amazing? That explains this. It explains the Dark Ages not having many authors or writing. It explains how William the Conqueror had to rebuild everything that was Roman. Lots of the Norman style is actually Roman style, as we've pointed out in earlier videos. And it goes on and on and on. And while Justinian was campaigning, boom, the comet hit, or volcanoes, or whatever happened. And he was suddenly able to conquer vast amounts of territories with actually quite a small army. Which is interesting. They always say, oh, they never gave Belisarius enough troops. He only had he had tens of thousands, maybe 10,000. He conquered Africa with maybe 10,000, 20,000. Just small numbers of troops, or maybe 30,000. Why? How did this work? What happened? And of course, Procopius calling Justinian a demon because he didn't understand what a comet was. Just amazing. So this is why medieval armies were so small. Okay, hope you've enjoyed.